Welcome to Daddy's Podcast.
This is the Redefining Plastics podcast. Welcome to Redefining Plastics. My name's Justin Riney. I've got another interesting one today. We're going to talk about how we can change the recycling industry. And we're going to talk to some folks that are doing that right now. Some of them you are going to recognize, the Brave team. But we also have the Circular Colorado team, which I met with, it's probably been 2 weeks ago now. And I really loved what we were talking about and everything that they're doing. So I begged, borrowed, and stole my way to getting them to come on today and to talk about what they're doing. So thank you, everybody, for being on, and really want to just go around the horn. I think I'll start with the Brave guys because everybody knows who they are. Just quick introductions, who you are. We'll start with Mitch.
Yeah, Mitch Best, just another guy at Brave, trying to change the way that we work together and handle the plastics industry. So happy to be back, Justin. Thanks for having us.
And then Adam in 30 seconds or less.
I'm Adam Hill, CEO of Direct Polymers and kind of the growth guys with Mitch here for Brave Industries, which is a new entity that we kicked off to start connecting some more dots in the recycling system.
Awesome. And then we'll go with Marge from Circular Colorado.
I am Marge Brown with Circular Colorado. I am one of a small and mighty team working with Laurie here.
All right. Well, then we'll go to Laurie.
Hey there, Laurie Johnson, founder, CEO, Circular Colorado, a nonprofit here in Colorado working to advance circularity. And probably today we'll talk about what role recycling plays in that. But not only in Colorado, in the surrounding region. And really, we like to roll up into national infrastructure.
Awesome. So you kind of gave us a little preface there, but what exactly is Circular Colorado? And how did the two of you get involved?
Okay. So Circular Colorado is a nonprofit that I founded probably almost 4 years ago now. Been in the recycling industry many years, and then that segued into being into circularity. So I have sat on board, led the way of passing some bills that have created enterprise funds and all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, there was nobody actually getting anything done. So I stepped back and said, okay, I don't want to start one more thing, but I don't really have a choice. So we'll start Circular Colorado because somebody's got to stand up the infrastructure. Operationally, somebody's got to get it done. And so we have a contract with the state of Colorado and funded by an enterprise fund to create this Circular Economy Center, which we'll talk about, and run it. So we're in our second year of that. And then what I did is I went and found the best person I could that I knew, my friend Marge. We go pretty far back to when we were both in Phoenix, doing lots of business and some sustainability stuff. And I said, come on, how are you going to pass this up? How are you going to pass up this chance to go change the world? So with that, you can go to Marge and she'll tell you how much fun she's having.
Yeah, a lot of pressure there, Marge.
Yeah.
You're going to have to talk about all the positives only.
I know. I don't have a choice at this point. But no, Laurie is absolutely right. He called me up and said, you've got to come out to Colorado. I was in New York. And my background is more on economic development, financial modeling, real estate, technology, more so than the sustainability space. But in talking to Laurie, those are the things that actually make this all possible and successful in the long run. You got to know the policy, you got to know all of that. But to make it happen, you got to have the financials and the government side to work as well. So I came over to here to move from New York to Colorado to work with Laurie and make things happen. And met Adam in the process, and now I'm here.
What's interesting to me is I had no clue that Adam and the Brave team was connected with you at all when we met originally. So when that came up during the conversation, that was pretty interesting to me. So Adam, you want to talk a little bit about how you're involved in Circular Colorado?
Yeah, I'm a board member. Done a lot of work in Colorado regarding to legislation. I've worked with Laurie for a really long time. She and I get along really well because we both grind it out at work and we just put in the work. Like she said, something needs to get done. We just go do it. And I've gotten to know Marge, and she's been a replica. So it's really good, except they're kind of yin and yang like Mitch and I. They work really well together, but they both have their skill sets. But yeah, I'm on board and we're trying to do some good stuff for an area that needs better solutions.
Yeah, I think recycling as a whole. That should just be like a slogan. We need better solutions.
That's right.
From there. Mitch, anything to add on this?
Well, we hear about all the EPR and all the legislation going across the country, but Colorado, I mean, some people would probably argue California and whatnot, but I feel like Colorado right now is ground zero for a lot of this, just with where we are as a region and what we have to pull from. But then more importantly, the people who are actually trying to build and drive change that's common sense change that we can actually execute on and not just propose legislation and then have it go through consulting consultants, as I like to say. And all the people here on this call are really the pioneers in this. And I think when we see the change actually happen across the country, it's going to stem from that middle of Colorado and what they're doing there and be able to have something that we can repeat across the country.
Yeah. The model in the conversation that we have was what was most exciting to me. And we're definitely going to get into that because I do want to talk about the circularity, the center, the transloading, and all that good stuff. But I ask every single person that comes on this show one question. I've already asked the Brave guys, so we're going to skip them for this one. But I'm going to start with Marge. What do you think of when you hear the word plastic?
Plastic bottle.
What about you, Laurie?
Problem.
All right. And I think that's a perfectly fine answer because that's the way most people view plastics right now. And so it's interesting that we're all working together to solve for that, right? Like that's the whole goal of everything that we're talking about here. But I really wanted to dig into the recycling and the circularity side. So I think this is going to segue into a discussion about what you're actually doing. But I wanted to start off, Laurie, what do you think is holding plastic recycling back in the U.S.? What's the biggest issue in your mind?
I mean, number one would just be awareness,
Okay.
right? So especially the general public, which drives a lot, and not them, but the industry in itself is everybody kind of just plays at the surface level. They listen to a lot of the media and things going on and different policies and all of that. But at the end of the day, plastic is a material, right? Just like any other material that we work with. There's different solutions. It's not a one size fits all, just like everything. And there's not been the education or the time taken to inform people enough to let them know that when you have that plastic in your hand, what it means. And so I think I would say that would be the biggest thing.
All right. Marge, what do you think?
Yeah, I was thinking Laurie used the word education, and I think that's a big piece of it. There's a disconnect between people thinking about manufacturing and raw materials and business and then recycling. Like somehow their recycling is what is sort of a soft, fuzzy thing to do. Manufacturing is real and substantive. And getting that bridge between the two of them, that they are deeply connected and they're not fuzzy stuff over here and real stuff over here, but it's all the same. And that comes down to education and awareness, like Laurie was talking about.
I agree with all of that. But what do you think, Mitch?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think a lot of people think curbside, and not to say that curbside isn't an issue in the post-consumer side. I mean, you've dug into that time and time again.
Mm-hmm.
But when we walk people for the first time into the facility out in Colorado where we're doing actual industrial and some post-consumer recycling, for them to actually understand like what it is. I mean, to both of their point, it's not just this, green, warm and fuzzy thing. It's actual real material feedstock that goes back into some of the stuff that is around all of us right now. And so at the end of the day, it's materials and how are we optimizing our material stream and our supply chain within America. So, that's part of what we're doing with our messaging too, is showing, the industrial revolution in America and onshoring and things like that, because to be able to do some of that, we're going to have better access to feedstock, better access to quality materials. And that, while we can do a good job and do good for the environment, all that through recycling, it is also very important to the overall manufacturing landscape of our country.
Yeah. Adam, anything to add?
I would just say that I agree with Laurie in the fact that it's a problem, and I think that it's a highly complex. It's a little bit different than papers and metals and things that can have more cross-contamination. Plastics is very specific, so it takes very specific solutions. And I love that Marge use the term bridge because that's really all we're trying to do is create bridges to build efficiencies into the system, because I would say that the way it's done today is a liability, and it's viewed as a liability, it's viewed as an inconvenience. But if you do it correctly, you do it efficiently, then it actually provides a lot of value add to the supply chain and can make things cheaper. But if it's done inefficiently in the way it's done today, it truly is sort of more of a liability, and that's why the company is viewing it that way.
Yeah. Can we solve these issues? Can we realistically solve these issues at scale? Because I think you guys are proving that you can do it in Colorado, and we'll get into the details, but can we really do that across the country, across the globe? I'll start with Laurie.
We can. We absolutely can. And we're actually doing a workshop at a big conference in Denver called Circularity at the end of April. And one of the main driving messages of that is pre-competition collaboration. Without that, we cannot. We won't get there if we can't get companies to come on board. Another reason why I created Circular Colorado, prior to where the space where they can compete, to bring all their resources and know-how together to come up with a solution that everyone can adopt, then it's insurmountable, right? But what I like about a big problem is this big opportunity. That's just always the way it is. So we just nowhere to go but up. And we have a million ways to get there, but you do have to get some type of agreement from people to come together and be willing to work together. So, and that really ends up being our biggest challenge in the space. It's not the technology. Like Adam said, it's complex, but I think he and Mitch too would also agree, it's also simple. If you know what you're doing and you do it right and everyone will work together, it's the path. It's a golden brick road. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
The dots they're only complex if you're not talking to each other.
That's all.
Once you're talking to each other, it makes it a lot simpler, right?
There's some stuff that's even simpler than that on the education side. Like what Laurie's talking about is probably what's going to move this the furthest and be the biggest impact. But we were talking to some people at the recycling show last week. They're like, oh, none of our recycling's working. And we're talking why? Well, they're basically throwing a bunch of their scrap materials into one Gaylord and sending it out, and that's never going to work. So if you can say, color code, here's a yellow box, here's a black box, here's a orange box, here's a whatever box, and train the people, maybe it's a little bit of extra work at the beginning, but they're able to actually separate the materials to be properly processed, then not only is that going to help and make a small dent in this issue, but it's also going to be able to allow us to give these companies money back for their materials, which incentivizes them. And maybe they pass that down to the warehouse staff who's taking a little bit of extra time. So there's little small things that we can be doing that are going to make those incremental changes. And then once everybody's kind of on board with that too, then we have the larger things where it's that pre-competition and really bringing it all together.
What do you think, Marge? You agree, disagree?
I definitely agree. And I want to go back to something you said is like, we're doing it in Colorado, but can you do it at a national level? Can you do it at a global level? And I think if we can do it in Colorado, you can do it anywhere, because Colorado has significant limitations.
Yeah.
Rail, where it's located, transportation is an issue, all these things. And I'm let Laurie talk a little more about this, but that's kind of what we're doing here is modeling it and saying, hey, we can do this in Colorado. Now you can start taking that as an example of what can be done around the country. So it's almost like if we can do it in Colorado, we absolutely can do it anywhere.
I agree with that. Colorado is possibly the most difficult state to recycle in the country. Maybe Montana, just from how spread out everybody is. But I think Colorado is a perfect example of what you can do in a difficult to recycle state. Adam, anything from your perspective? Or go ahead, Laurie.
Well, so Colorado's difficult, but I can think of some neighbors that might even be a little worse off, like Nebraska. Yeah. And, some others. And so we joined them all together and said, all right, well, let's put it all in the pot. Yeah. And see what we can do with like a regional hub and spoke model, because none of these states have major population areas except Phoenix. They're included in our regional model. So that makes it far more difficult. So even if we can attract the manufacturers here, and when we get back in this conversation, we're talking about recycling. But recycling is one component of circular economy, right? There's transportation and logistics, there's manufacturing, there's distribution, there's economic development, all these other things that are critical. But yeah, if we can do it in this region and figure that out, then really it's a fast track for everybody else.
Adam, anything to add on your end?
I would just completely agree with all that. Like Colorado is definitely one of the most difficult states to do it in. The reason that I like having a circular Colorado and CEDC is because they can help communicate with the state. Like we have challenges here with costs and overhead and things that are much higher in this city than they are in other cities. And I think it's necessary for the states to understand what the deal is. And then when you talk about building solutions, we are building a regional solution because the issues that occur in this area of the country are exactly what Marge said. There's like limited population densities, far distances to travel. There's not a lot of manufacturing. The freight rates are high and expensive. But when you take lots of little pockets of, various population areas with manufacturing over a few states, it actually aggregates a lot of plastic. And so we're building a hub for this region to be the compounder, for olefins and the collector of whatever plastics we can get our hands on. And I would say that scaling it nationally is not hard. It's actually fairly simple, and especially to increase diversion. But the question is, are we actually trying to increase diversion rates, or are we trying to like pitch GR and do other things? Because increasing diversion is not hard, but you have to do it correctly. And, I think some of the companies and areas and states need to ask themselves if they really want to divert more plastics. There's a big difference between that and going after post-consumer recycling or something like that. You know what I mean?
I mean, the whole concept of diverting more isn't going to do any good if we don't have anything to do with it, which is why we're focusing on the manufacturing side so that we're actually doing something with that diverted waste.
Yeah.
Well, that's the biggest issue, right? Was demand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when we mention things like railroad ties, it's just because you look at that product and you're like, that you run 40 miles in each state, you divert the size of a small resin facility, 1.36 billion pounds. You run 40 miles in every state. It's pretty simple. You know what I mean? And they can take a wide variety of olefins. And so we're looking at it from that perspective. And honestly, we're not waiting on the states. We're just going. Laurie and Marge aren't either. Like, we're just going to go fix some stuff,
So, Laurie, you mentioned the pre-competitive collaboration. And I think most people, when they hear pre-competitive and working together, they think antitrust or they think some other concern. And I know that's not what you're talking about. You're talking about just making sure you're connecting the right dots and making sure that people are even aware that these things exist, and then getting these materials to the best place to most efficiently recycle them. So do you want to talk a little bit more about kind of the model and your thoughts on that side of the equation?
Yeah, I'd love to. And just for the audience listening, CEDC is the Circular Economy Development Center. So we'll do our best to describe the acronyms here. And that's a little bit of color because this is a model that we would love to have folks adopt simply in the name of advancing recycling and circularity. So the CEDC was created in a House bill here in Colorado, and it earmarked this funding out of an enterprise fund, which is created from a tip fee at the landfill. I'm going to keep it real high level and simple. And it created the CEDC, the framework for a CEDC. Circular Colorado, as I said before, is a 501c3 nonprofit, and we have the contract with the state funded by the enterprise fund to create this center. So the model is, and the reason why this works is because exactly like you said, Justin, you talk to all the big brands, right? Like, let's get Coke and Pepsi in a room and go, hey, let's just all share our ideas, before you go hit the market shelf. Doesn't that sound great? Well, that sounds great, except for there's a lot of things that are proprietary. And we know, the list goes on. Are there secret sauces? Yes and no. Business strategies, all of that. The beauty about this model and why it's working is because Circular Colorado is what's ushering this pre-competitive space through the process. So we're like, I always say, we're a walking NDA. So we sign NDAs with everyone, we hold true to all of them, and then we're able to collect the pieces and then have the knowledge to know what's in the puzzle, right? And where each piece can go without violating anything that's proprietary to anyone. So it takes a lot of trust, but now we've been at it for 2 years and folks see that, I can let them go out and talk to my partners. I can let them look at my financials. I can let them, right, so they can understand the strategy. And then the beauty is the folks that are involved in that, then they just get to do their business as usual every day. They get to mind their business. And usually what happens is people, companies, organizations, large and small, say, we've got to solve this. And they've got a slew of folks that are on their staff that already have a plate load of things that they have to do. And it's just one more thing. And so nobody has a clear path or a dedicated focus to get to the solution. And so that's why this is working. We built the trust. We have these NDAs. We're able to take in everyone's information, build out the solution, and then everybody, just like a team, right? So whether we're a quarterback or a nucleus, if you like science, we're just the ones that, march it down the field with everybody playing their role. So that's why the model works, I think.
All right. So Adam, you are a member and you are working with these folks and you're on the board. So obviously you find value in exactly what she's talking about. So you want to talk about like what draws you to working with the CEDC?
Yeah, I think every state should have one. Like Laurie said, they're doing exactly what we're doing at national scale at the Colorado level, but they're doing it on the other side of the coin. So they're communicating with the state entities. They're helping bridge the gaps between the communication of why an end market would be necessary here, communicating with us about the feedstocks that we could provide for it, and, doing things that just don't happen in general, especially in the business world. Like no one goes and communicates the supply chain downstream. They all do things independently, and that's why things get done inefficiently a lot of the times, So when you can co-work with a group to say, we can identify materials that can be diverted and we can create feedstocks to go into an end market. We've been working with Laurie and them to help assist some of the end markets to get here for plastics, because having end markets in Colorado would change everything. It really would. We have more manufacturing here. We could divert a ton of plastic, and that's our main hurdle. So yeah, they're driving communication and connecting dots in the exact same way that we are. And I truly mean it. Every state should have this model.
Yeah. The first thing I thought when I was sitting in the meeting that we had a couple weeks ago with the CEDC team was, this sounds a lot like Brave. Everything that we're talking about is very similar to the model that Adam and Mitch are building. And so I just thought it was interesting from that perspective. Anything to add there, Mitch?
I mean, I think that when you look at all of this, just from a purely business level, because we always talk about how, like, for it to be circular, it has to be profitable. Everything that they're doing, everything they're talking about is a bottom line enhancer. Every bit of it. All of this is lost margin that's either being passed on to the consumer or being taken away from shareholders or something like that. So when we talk about all of these things about just focusing on how we can optimize manufacturing and optimize feedstocks and optimize the transportation, it does nothing but enhance the bottom line or make pricing go down. So it's, when you look at it from like a purely economic standpoint, it's one of the most powerful things that we can be working on as a country.
Let me add one thing though, you guys, because I think it's good for the listeners to know. We have a little jump start. Okay, so when I keep mentioning this enterprise fund, the Circular Economy Development Center, run by Circular Colorado, has the advantage to be able to go straight to the state with proposals. So at the tire project, we just finished up. We got a group of folks who are advancing the circularity of tires, $11 million. Well, that's not a small thing. And so manufacturers and folks are becoming aware that we have these grant funds. So that's one thing, right? And that's what funds the CEDC. However, you don't have to have the grant funds. You probably do need a CEDC. It's not a huge, huge ticket. So it could be done without having an enterprise to fund it. There are plenty of large corporations, brands, if they just put in a little bit, could facilitate a CEDC model somewhere with or without an enterprise. But I do think it's important and fair to say, yeah, we're doing really great stuff, but we also have some really cool tools in our toolbox.
I was just going to add kind of a thought to what Mitch was saying around the kind of the economic side of it. So my background is finance and operations. It's not sustainability. It's not environmental issues. And what I like about what we're able to do here with the CEDC is to really focusing on growing the economy here. What are the economic development benefits? And, yes, there's grant money that's accessible, like Laurie was talking about, and that is kind of that jumpstart, a catalyst, if you will. But we won't work with companies unless we've, looked at their 3 or 5 year pro formas, made sure that they are a viable, feasible company that's going to sustain itself in Colorado, even after that catalyst jumpstart. So there really is an economic focus here, and the added benefit is the environmental from my perspective. But it's all about, like Mitch was saying, it's the economics here that makes it work.
She just made such a good point, because we've seen other grant programs that have gone out where the best solution or the most common sense solution to all this stuff isn't necessarily it's going more for the headline. So we know that there's a company that's going to go get XYZ amount of grant dollars that, just from being inside the industry, we know will probably not work. Love for them to work, but probably won't for one reason or another. But we know that it gets a really good headline. Yeah. And that's a part of a problem with some of these programs, is that they don't do that digging that the two of them do. They don't look at the pro formas. They don't look at really the economic viability of these things. They just look at, wow, this is a really nice headline and this is a great story. And you have to have both.
I was just going to say, part of what we're doing with Brave is when companies get large enough, they tend to become inefficient just due to their size alone. And they're kind of like battleships trying to turn them and have them pivot into new processes and things like that. I feel the same way about the states. I'm not knocking big companies or the states. They've got a lot to do. They've got a lot of different areas to focus in. So it's really beneficial to be able to have a group that can communicate. And also, like, for example, I'm not going to go into it too much because we're not talking too much about it, but like, we're working with a lot of the legislative areas that occurred with like some of the marijuana, because it went state to state and didn't have any federal oversight. But to have like a Circular Colorado and a CEDC available to let companies know that we're providing updates to legislation, particularly like the small companies who might not know where to go for information, or to fill in gaps in communication that, the states or the companies might need. It's just really beneficial to have a group whose job it is to just connect those dots.
What was most intriguing to me on our original conversation, I love everything we've talked about so far, but the nuts and bolts of what we discussed about the Circularity Center and how that process works, I really want to highlight that, because I think that is actually connecting those dots. Like, we've talked about this almost hypothetically in a way while we're discussing the first part of this, but this is like real boots on the ground. You guys are making a real difference. So I really want to talk about kind of how that came about and what you're doing to put these pieces together. I'll start with Laurie on that one.
Yeah, and I think you're probably, Justin, referring a little bit to, let's talk about the Transload, our first project here, now called the Circular Transportation Network. So we always have known, it's not a secret, that transportation is an Achilles heel in all of this, in a lot of this, no matter really sometimes where you are. And so we saw that just even in Colorado, we can't get materials from outside the Front Range. If you're not familiar with Colorado, the Front Range runs from Pueblo to Fort Collins. It's where 80% of the population lies. And so we're like, all right, well, we have to do something to address the transportation. Recycling, put it in your bin or put it, in a container or bale it. We understand that. We know how to make something. That's manufacturing. We know that input, we need that to become a recycled content, right, material. But we can't afford to transport it. So we looked at this. We talked to the rail companies. We know the trucking companies, and a lot of that is thanks to me working with Adam over the years and learning so much from him. He's a plastics guy, but he's also a logistics guy. So don't let him fool you. These guys, they know logistics.
They do.
And BNSF was willing to talk to us, and they said, hey, we've got these transload sites and they can't seem to drum up any business. So they connected us. From there, we saw the solution. We're like, what if we were to pilot or proof of concept milk runs where there's these trucks that are leaving this area where there's a rail transload out with products like lumber, retail products and such, and they're coming back empty. And this is happening all over the place. So what if we capitalize, so to speak, on that in a conscious way, and we have these trucks pick up recyclables on their way back? And so that's what we did. We put together a program. We architected the whole thing with all the different partners. That's a big part of our model. All the puzzle pieces, right? We put them together, drew this picture of the Circular Transportation Network. And so today there's trucks going out across Colorado, and we can also use rail to retrieve and receive products, bringing it back, offloading it. So you could get 7 different materials on one truck. in
Mhm.
super sacks, gaylords, very simple. People don't have to have balers. They offload it, they aggregate it, they bale it. When they have enough to go to market, they go, preferably by rail if we don't have a solution here in Colorado. If they can't go by rail, then they go by full truckload, right? So there's environmental too, right? We're helping reduce the carbon, but we're showing that we can get materials to market and jump that hurdle of the transportation costs based on the commodity price of all different materials, right? So it's a little complicated because cardboard could be really high today and plastics would be in the toilet. Aluminum is always probably going to be pretty good. And so you've got to, factor all that. And that's where Marge comes into play, because you could put all that stuff in a spreadsheet and see if it works. But then you bring in policy like EPR, and now we can come back to them and say, let us tell you what a subsidy would be for a material and why the commodity rate can't pay for the transportation, and therefore why you can't get your material, right? It's
Yeah.
because of the cost of the transportation. So that was our first project that we got funded, not big, a little over $300,000 for the infrastructure of the transload, scales and balers and, curtain trailers and all that stuff. And we're the organizer, right? We let the transload do their job, the truckers do their job, and we execute on the actual solution. And that's the transportation piece. And it just kind of goes down that line. We might take a technology piece and do some of the research and match people together and get some funding, right, to advance a solution that might deal with some type of plastic.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably what you're talking about.
That is exactly what I'm talking about. Marge, what do you got?
Yeah, the one thing I was just going to add to what Laurie was saying is, she said we connect the dots. I would argue that we're a little bit more, we're also the logistics side of it. And that goes along with what, Adam does too. The logistics of doing everything that Laurie just described, her team does that too, making sure that the actual connections are made, but then they're also managed and make sense.
Yep. Even all the way down to, at this transload, we've also are standing up a commercial for businesses recycling drop site, right? All the way down to the signage to make sure, because the transloader doesn't know recycling. So to make sure that the public's getting the right message. And so we have a team of 4 full-time, soon to be 3 part-time, soon to be 4, and we have satellite offices across the state so that we can mirror the region that we're working with. So we have somebody boots on the ground about 25% time in each of the 4 different regions in Colorado. So yeah, we do the whole gamut. Again, you kind of have to have one chef in the kitchen, the main chef, or else you mess up the meal.
Yeah.
So that's what we do.
What do you think, Adam? Anything to add there?
Yeah, I would just say that by setting up aggregation sites, one of the problems that exists, particularly in plastics, is that companies are often specialized, especially the compounding facilities and some of the larger facilities, they're a HDPE and polypropylene recycler, or they're a polycarbonate and ABS compounder. So what you see, logistically, is that these commodities oftentimes travel 4 states across to get to the recycler. So when you talk about, goes back to my comment on diversion, if you actually want to increase diversion rates, you look at it like we are, kind of like dots on the map, where you can look at it like you would a production line, right? Build an efficient production line. And when you can create a spot on that map to collect, regionally or locally collect, it doesn't just have to be one type of product. You can create revenue streams for a lot of these other companies. A transload facility co-working with us can get a lot additional revenue because they can package off resin that we can sell here. They can consolidate materials that we can't do ourselves because they're in smaller quantities down south. But you also can start selling one transload facility to take cardboard and metals and plastics and compost. You can saturate the site. And once you can do that, that allows for the diversion. And then, once you're communicating properly, you can send those materials and streamline them to the best possible route, right?
Yeah.
In order to create the value that you need in order to bring back circular, competing with virgin materials.
Yeah, I would say this conversation here is where I wanted more people to hear what you all are doing, because I think we talked about it a little bit. Logistics is where recycling lives or dies. If we don't do it well, we have a problem. And then if everybody's looking out for their best interest, the milk run model doesn't exactly work. because nobody is going to be collecting 16 different materials on the way down when all they want out of that is one. So that's where all of this comes together. By collaborating and working together, you're filling up a truck, and then you're filling up a rail car, when before you would only have a quarter of a truck and maybe an eighth of a rail car. So then you've solved the logistics side of it, but there's that trust factor, that like the walking NDA conversation, because I come out of big brands and packaging, and the trust factor with recycling is very low. It's a very low threshold where they're going to say, there's no way I'm going to give my information to anybody. So if you've got somebody that's proving that it works, and you can scale it, this is exactly the kind of solution we need as an industry to make plastic recycling work at scale. Because I think our biggest problem right now is we're just not recycling enough, because we don't have the collection, the sortation, and the end market lined up for these materials. And if you don't look at it holistically, all three of those, you're always going to fail. So that's why I love what you guys are doing, and just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, and all we are though simply is a bridge, though, Justin. So like what you're talking about, the big brands. So I'd been around too, right? I'm obviously old enough. Is that when you look at these big brands, they cannot be boots on the ground and walk into a local industry person, see what they're actually doing and whether they should trust them or not, right? Yeah. So that's where we come in and we go, no, we don't deal with this guy. We deal with this guy. Like we've been to their back of house, right? And so we don't have to give away their business, but we can strategically put the brands where they need to be, knowing that we've already vetted everything out. I mean, we are a walking NDA, we're a walking vetting mobile. I mean, we just vet everything out, but we're actually on the street doing it. So you also have to be able to get into people's Rolodex to do that, right? And you have to have a Rolodex. Like you can't just go out and start to survey the land. You have to actually know what's going on. And there's no way big corporate will know that. And they're not designed to. They're designed to, make the products that they're making. And so I think that's another reason this is working out, is on a larger scale, they see the trust in action and the proof in the pudding. And so they're like, oh, all I really have to do is get on the bus. The bus will drive me across the bridge, across the river, and then I can go. So it's pretty simple.
It's simple, but it's really not. You're solving something that hasn't been solved in 40 years. Let's be clear. This system has been broken for a long time.
It's been broken, but you can keep it. If you keep it simple and stay laser focused, and you understand what it takes to build that bridge, right? It can be simple if you've got the right folks, to do it.
You got to have the right skill sets. I agree. Go ahead, Marge.
And I was just say that the skill set is so important, and that's one of the compelling things and why I came out to work for Worry, is that there's a lot of conversation happening around like kind of ivory tower policy of like, and philosophy, and this is how you're going to solve circularity. And there's tons of it out there. There's not a lot of people that are ex-haulers, which Laurie is, among other things, who are going to go out and are doing it, right? And so when she says boots on the ground, like literally, like we're on the ground going out and meeting people and talking to people, and picking up a load of styrofoam if we need to, right? Like literally doing what needs to be done. If you had more of that would be huge.
Yeah. And you're speaking to my heart with this styrofoam or EPS.
I had to throw that in there for you.
Keep it coming. But so I want to transition just a little bit, unless Adam, you had something to add?
I just wanted to say on the trust factor, two things. One is there's a level of trust that I think everyone, whether it be plastics or the country, needs to realize, like when you do trust, you can create teams that can outcompete. So it's like taking the risk of trusting, but when you do co-work, you can outcompete independence. And then I would say that there's also varying levels of trust. Like when you look at the big corporations, they're not going to go search out 40 regional small plastics companies. They want dependability to their waste stream so they don't affect their processes and systems. And so they have a tendency to want to partner up at national scale, right? And when you have regional facilities like Direct Polymers or Alternative Plastics or Choice Plastics or whoever it is, they don't have the ability to manage a national account because they're regional to an area. And when you have a big corporation, they need national accounts. And then you look at the compounders, they are not going to go out and take combo truckloads with drop trailer service that has loose barrels and stacks of pallets and OCC bales and these things. So when you talk about levels of trust, it's funny because those 3 layers end up going big corporate to waste consolidation. They take it and handle it and do a bunch of stuff and typically cross-contaminate it with paper and things like that, typically charging the corporations. And then they distribute it to companies like ours who then use a broker because they're all working independently and don't know each market. And then they go to an end market that's either selling it to the open market or bringing it back around to those same corporations anyway. So when you have the trust layers, what you do is you're like, these 3 layers independently can't do a national contract, but in trusting one another and working together, you can go to a big corporation and say, we have the ability through Brave, because we have dots all over this fat, to manage a national contract. It's not going to come at a cost. It's going to go to the most efficient avenue that's then going to get bridged to a strategic compound partnership and offer the corporation as a first right of refusal the material back, or tell them, we'll sell it into the open market, but not to one of your competitors. So you have a lot more control when you're bridging those 3 layers together that independently couldn't do it anyway. So there's incentive when you build the trust factor correctly to want to work together because there's more value, there's more business, right? Like these companies couldn't do this otherwise. And that's why we're with Brave trying to do basically horizontal and vertically integrated partnerships that win. I'm like looking at it like if we're kids on a playground picking a team, picking your players. And I don't want to pick the players to make the most money. I want to pick the players to win the game. You know what I mean? Because when you win the game, you make more money. So that's all I would say on the trust factor.
I think you did a pretty darn good job there of explaining everything that's wrong with plastic recycling. So I'm gonna make a clip out of that one. But so I wanted to transition a little bit. It's similar conversation to what we've been having, but extended producer responsibility in Colorado. So I view the Colorado legislation as the most reasonable and feasible EPR law in the U.S. It's the one that most closely resembles what's going on in Quebec and in Europe. And it's using a proven model to make EPR happen in the U.S. It's not like California, who's trying to reinvent the wheel and is going to buckle under its own weight. So I wanted to talk about how you all are interfacing with that. But then I also want to talk about what do you think the outcomes are going to be? So I want to start with like the interface and how Circular Colorado is working with CAA and the state of Colorado to make this work. And then we'll jump into the other piece. Laurie, you want to start us off?
Oh, all right. That's a big one. It is and it isn't, I guess. So again, one reason we all get along is we're all super transparent. We don't do a whole heck of a lot. So we're over here. We know they've got a huge mountain to climb, even though they've got probably the best policy and the most boots on the ground and simpler than other places. But we're out here doing things like the transload because EPR is great. But again, if you can't get the material to get it back into a product, like you're done.
Yes, that's my primary point in bringing this
You're
up.
done. So we're out here running around, trying to show, well, we got to get the manufacturers, then we got to make sure the transportation is in play. How are you going to get this stuff, from across the state and the region as far as here, and how can you, again, replicate that? So it's interesting. The collection, so if transportation and logistics is the Achilles heel of recycling collection will be the Achilles heel of circularity, because you cannot, we say single stream, because it's easy. It's not easy, it's lazy, right?
Yes.
So now we've just promoted, which the Western culture is great at doing, just laziness, to just throw it in there and it's somebody else's problem. So, on this circular transportation network, we only pick up source separated material.
Yes.
And if people want to get it recycled and they don't want to pay a trash bill for it, they will source separate it. So without clean material, it's too encumbering, right? To make it an input for a new product, because now you got to clean it. You got to sort it, you got to clean it, you got to do all these different things. And so as far as EPR goes, we are really just trying to lay the groundwork way out ahead of them so that if they actually can, and they should hopefully get it across the finish line to where everyone has recycling in Colorado and make that happen, and then the supply, goes 10x, that we have somewhere for that to go.
So the reason why I wanted to have this conversation is I don't think any amount of investing in the collection side of the equation is going to solve for any of the problems we've talked about so far. Because we've talked about the issues in recycling, and I don't think anybody's even mentioned the word collection in this entire discussion. It's everything after collection that's the problem. So I've always viewed EPR as a good tool to increase collection, because increased collection is good. Don't get me wrong. I want to collect more material for recycling. But it's not fixing the real issue. And so I look at EPR as just one piece of the bigger puzzle. And somebody like Circular Colorado or CEDC is going to be the ones that are actually solving the problems, connecting the dots. Because, and the other issue is we only have 43% of Americans that actually participate in the system anyway, that have access to it. So how do we fix that? Those are the issues. And what we're trying to do is spend more money to collect more. But then if people aren't participating, why are we even doing that? It boggles my mind that people don't look at these things holistically. And that is why I want to make sure we have these conversations.
I want to jump through the screen, right? Because also EPR is curbside single stream. And that's not the largest percentage of our material issue, first and foremost. But that aside, still a great thing. So CEDC also, it should air in like the next month or two, we would hope, on Rocky Mountain PBS, did a PBS special on circular economy so that it would reach the general public on, see this bottle? This bottle can become another bottle in 3 weeks in Colorado. We're talking about glass, right? Or even plastic. You've got to show folks. Right now, the American public thinks recycling is baloney, right?
You're speaking my language right now.
They're like, it's BS. Because I've seen the video on YouTube of the trash truck picking out the recycling and going straight to the landfill. Company to be nameless, right? But it could be all of them. Don't tell me, why am I going to pay $30 extra a month for the same truck to take my stuff the same place? They only have to see that one time, right? To negate everything that they've learned. And so it's another portion of what we do. We don't really do education, but indirectly we do. We're out there trying to brand circularity, quite frankly, and give it some substance, even just to the American public, both in the home and in industry and at work.
I would love access to that video whenever it publishes. I will shout it from the rooftops, because I've been saying for months, what we need to do is communicate to the consumer and show them from waste all the way through to new product exactly how the system works, to show them that it actually is working. Because 16% of Americans, when they were surveyed, say that they don't think recycling ever happens, that it's a complete fraud and a complete waste. That number is up nearly 8% in the last 3 years.
The interesting thing, though, is with the folks, the State Department of Economic Development, who helped us make that possible, but the filmmaker and everyone, we had to battle and rewrite the script over and over, because all they want to do is talk about recycling, like putting in. The circular and the economic part is just beyond people's mind, quite honestly. They think it goes away. If I ever run another bill, ever in my life, it will be that you cannot graduate from high school until you have gone to, until you've gone to a landfill, a recycling center, and a wastewater treatment plant. Period. You cannot graduate. You flunk. I don't care if you're straight A's, because nobody knows where their materials go. They just think it goes away. As we know.
Probably throw financial literacy in there too for these kids
too.
That are taking
Let's just
out
give them a
student
whole
loans.
bunch, right?
Yeah,
they have a credit card.
Kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jeez. Exactly.
Marge, anything to add on your side from that?
No, Laurie covered it. It's better that she did, because I would be maybe less diplomatic in my response.
Hey, you know what? Less diplomatic is typically how I get more views. So the The more
Well, but I
angry
also
you
have to.
get,
I also have to. We have a reputation,
I
you
get
know,
it.
work to
I
do
get
that's
it. I'm
important.
just giving you a hard time.
But
Yeah.
but yeah, it'll be interesting to see the actual impact of
Yeah.
each.
Well, I'm gonna if you can get it to me, I'll put it all over social. It'll be
We have it,
everywhere.
but we're going to
Yeah.
give it to you once it's actually aired on
Once it
PBS.
publishes.
Yeah.
Perfectly fine. Yeah.
Yep, yep.
Adam, anything to add on your side for this?
Yeah.
Yeah, I figured. That's why I asked.
You look at EPR and it's like you said, you go divert every pound of plastic. I mean, the landfill is the collection site too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If there's nowhere for it to go, there's literally no point collecting it.
Yep.
It's
just extra cost for no reason.
So when you look at what they're doing, I have big issues with the PIR, PCR. We got two identical types of plastic. One has this label, one has that. This one costs 50% more than resin. This one's half as much. The goal for EPR, this goes back to the diversion, should be diversion of materials and then entry into value add end markets. It should not be looked at like a liability. And what's happening now is they're looking at it like a liability, you know, like it's something that they have to go do because they're being forced to do it. And there's actually a lot of profit if you do it correctly with the circularity aspect. And I would say that EPR, from my perspective, has created a lot of gimme mentality, right? Everybody wants to charge something. And that's the problem with the United States is you want to get something done, there needs to be charges to it. Go point the finger at someone else and tell them to pay for it. And I'm like, why? Why do that, right? Our perspective on EPR has been to try to, again, create bridges where we're communicating with some of the larger corporations to be like, here's a way we could industrially wrap material back around to if you want to reuse it. But you can do the same thing with the consumer grade materials. I would say that, again, we do business with a lot of haulers. I have nothing against haulers, but they have a lot of control in these systems. And like the corporations who are being told to pay for everything and to cover, you know, tonnage consolidation have no control over the material streams. And that's a problem because they're being asked to pay for everything and they're like obliging, but then they can't say, give me my stuff back, you know? So that to me in itself is kind of a broken system. And I think there's very easy ways by providing communication to the cities who are looking to sign the contracts where they could give first right of refusal back to the companies. I think that, and granted, the legislation doesn't always allow for that, but that doesn't mean that you don't go, talked about the horizontal and vertical partnerships. That doesn't mean you don't go talk to this hauler and say that hauler just built a bunch of downstream plants and you're at a disadvantage. But if you partner with a company like us who can help create these bridges, like they could have more leverage on city contract bidding and things like that. And so the whole EPR thing, I mean, I think it has like the right message as far as wanting to manage our waste streams correctly, but I think that it should focus much more on diversion. There should be a lot more cross communication. The companies should be able to have access to their materials back easier. And I think that is only accomplished with bridging the pivoting, like quick decision abilities of the small companies who are willing to put in the work at their plants with the large processing and compounding facilities, and then having like communication with the states and the CAAs and those types of the big corporate groups. And so our approach to EPR hasn't been give us this or pay for that. It's been, what can we go build to assist? You know, we're asking, I was with people last week at the show and they were like, well, what can we do for you? And I was like, what can we do for you? Right? Like, what's your goals? Tell me what your goal is. Do you want to take this back and try to reuse it? Or are you just trying to go through the motions to divert it? Do you know, because we can go create the solutions. It's literally just math and communication, but no one does it, you know, and there's that trust factor. And like I said, with our stuff, we're just starting to notice that when you do have the trust, you can outcompete. So it's a risk of, hey, let's go co-work and do some things together, but we're also co-vesting with the companies we're working with. You mentioned antitrust and things like that. Basically just taking the same approach that any private equity or something would do. I mean, essentially Brave is a private equity, but it's a private equity for the 99% down there. and not the 1% up here. Like even within our own group, we've got people that own private jets and, like they have significant funding available. We're just taking our internal group and saying this group has 13, 15 facilities with subcontracting capabilities and transload facilities and a relationship with CEDC can create systems that can outcompete. And, and you don't need to typically especially a small company, if you want to make a move at your own business, you need to go ask for a bunch of money and give away a huge chunk. And I'm like, you don't have to do that when you do have trust and you can co-work with other companies and build efficiencies. That company might have the best system for this. And this person's got great salespeople and that one has the ability to compound. So you look at, like, if I wanted to go invest something here, I typically go borrow against a line of credit or get an investor and give up big chunks and you're risking a lot. And instead you could be like, we diversify within this group our capabilities and our skill sets and our needs at these different facilities. So if I want to go put a compounder in, I'm calling the compounder guy. If we want to import containers, we're calling the export and import person that we work with. Like, it's take a little less maybe, but communicate well, and so EPR, I think, gets best solved by doing the things that we're doing. Unfortunately, there's just not a lot of communication going on, and they're trying to play by a playbook and a blueprint that as generalized as they're making it out to be. It's complex and plastics are difficult, and you can't just, there's a problem when you have industrial plastics in millions of pounds that literally can't be recycled right now that are clean, and then saying you're going to go divert all the consumer grade and charge a premium for it to companies.
Well, I typically give everybody an opportunity for any other topics. I don't know if you had something quick you wanted to throw out there, maybe a plug for how people can get in touch with you.
Oh yeah, they can circularcolorado.org.
Okay.
Super easy. Yeah.
I'll put
reach
it in the
out to
show
us.
notes. And for the record, I love what you guys are doing. I am
we
a huge
appreciate
fan of
that.
it. I want to make sure that everybody in the U.S. knows about it. And so appreciate the heck out of the time today. And this has been the Redefining Plastics podcast. My name is Justin Riney. Thank you to the CEDC and the Brave team.
Thank you to you.
Thank you.
If you want to learn more about the plastics industry, recycling, check out these other videos. Please like and subscribe.